And just to say, the title of Amanda's talk for us is Leadership Resilience with Backbone. Where did we hear about bones earlier on? Backbone, heart, and integrity. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Good afternoon, ladies. And indeed, good afternoon to the one gentleman who's brave enough to be here today. We appreciate it. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege to stand here in front of you. And basically, I was sitting in my office a couple of months ago and the phone rang. I picked up the phone and it was Mary Colleen Fitzgerald on the phone. And Mary said to me, Amanda, we're running this event in Adair and we'd really love you to come down and tell your story. So, you know, me being me, I said, of course, no problem, Mary, you know. Put the phone down. And then I was thinking, oh my goodness, you know what? I have never been asked to just tell my story. I'm normally talking on some topic around leadership, and I'd have my PowerPoints and my slides, and I'd be here clicking and talking. So I really had to think about this. What was my story? What is my story? How did I get to be here? And you know, the more I thought about it, I realized that the thing that's always run through what I'm about, it's always been about developing managers and developing leaders. And the story actually begins when at the age of 9, there I was in the back garden, lining up all these chairs and calling the local children into a meeting. And I was chairing the meeting. You know, I can't remember what the agenda was, but God help them. Everyone had to listen, because the thing is, in my house, my dad was in the bank. He was always in a meeting, going to a meeting, or coming from a meeting. It was all about meetings, so I was fascinated with this idea. And I really wanted to be part of that. And the other thing is that I spent many, many hours in the back of smoky halls. You know those old halls with the smell of cigarette smoke? You know, where they're putting on musicals in the local hall. And my dad was on stage, and he was always singing. He was involved in Oklahoma or whatever. And I absolutely loved that. I became transfixed with what was going on stage. So when it came to choosing a career, I was in Birr Community School. You know, we moved around the country as bank families do. So by the time I was in secondary school, I was in Birr. It's funny you say, where does somebody belong? So I was in Birr at that point, trying to decide what did I want to do? What did I want to do when I grow up? So the two kind of options that were put out on the table on the late 80s were I could either become a nurse or I could go into teaching. And I remember the two leaflets being handed to us. Now, there was no way I could go into nursing or anything in the medical field. But I thought, yeah, maybe teaching. Teaching will bring it all together. All about developing people. And, you know, I can continue it with my musicals. So off I went. I went to St. Pat's, Drumcondra. Everything was tickety-boo. I was loving it. I came out first of my class. I was the first to have the teaching diploma, and I was the first to have a permanent and pensionable job at the age of 21. There I was, set for life. You know, isn't that what everybody wants, a permanent and pensionable job in a tiny country school? You know, I'm just looking back and thinking about that time now. And a couple of very key things happened during that time. One thing that I remember distinctly was that the priest used to pop in, and he would come in and he would talk to all the kids, which was fine. But then he'd start to ask questions to find out whether or not people remembered their prayers. So I don't know whether he was testing me or he was testing the children. But there was one day he came in and he was doing this, and on the way out, some guy hadn't said it precisely right, and he turned around and he said, you know, I hope the next time I come that you will know all your prayers. So anyway, I just thought, hang on a second here. I went outside the door, Bearing in mind there's 42 kids in the class to one adult, so I couldn't actually leave the classroom. There was no such thing as SNAs. I left my foot in the door and I spoke out like this and I said, "Don't you ever do that in my classroom again." I said, "You have no idea what's going on in that child's life." I was so cross. You know, the parents were going through separation. There was a lot of stuff going on. And the assumptions that were made. You know, so that was one part to me. The other part to me was thinking, uh-oh, this man has the power to fire me. As they did, because they selected the teachers and managed the teachers. Anyway, I survived and went on. And it's funny, we were talking, I was watching the presidential debate last night. I'm not sure if any of you were watching it. Yeah, I won't actually comment on that. I'll keep my views to myself. But it wasn't that inspiring. But you know, it brought me back to the time Mary Robinson was president, and my goodness, early 90s. It was amazing. Talk about women empowerment. It felt so brilliant around that time. It feels a bit like that here today as well, with the speakers and with the positivity. You know, everything seemed possible. And within that classroom, I had third and fourth class, and they did these fabulous posters. They were absolutely amazing. They covered the walls. It was all about Mary Robinson, and everybody was buzzing. The energy was brilliant. And what I wanted to do then was to get the principal down, somebody that represented leadership, to come and talk and acknowledge all this amazing work that had been done. So I asked the principal to pop down. He was a man. No offense to anybody again in the room. But anyway, I asked him to come down, and he said, "Just send up the work." So we had to take all of these things down off the wall, dispatched a couple of kids to go and bring these up, and he didn't come back down to the classroom. He sent back down all these projects with first, second, and third written on them. Again, I was absolutely devastated. I couldn't believe it. I thought, what? How could you do this? How could you do this to this group of children? Why wouldn't you come down and just give some encouragement and positivity? Why wouldn't you say, "Well done, everybody"? You know, so anyway, I licked my wounds, I got going again, as you do. Everyone here in the room has that ability. You just keep going. So I did. And I was there one day. I used to have the chats with them on a Friday afternoon. So I had one of these lovely high stools, something like this, you know, and they were all sitting around. I think it's called circle time now. In my day, it was just having the chats. So there we were having the chats, and I was asking them, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And it was amazing, you know, they were all saying, "I want to be this, I want to do that." And I had a sudden voice saying to me, "What are you doing here?" So I'm not one to dilly-dally. Once I made up my mind, I was gone. I was put in for a career break, off to Trinity College, and I decided that I still liked education, but maybe there was another route in education. So I went down the route of doing a master's in education. Again, I was buzzing. Youngest in the class, I came top of the class. It was all hunky-dory. I ended up setting up a partnership between Rhode Island College and Trinity College because my area of specialism was teams. And in Ireland in the early 90s, you know, people weren't really studying teams and the power of teams and collaboration within the workplace. Some of the American multinationals were bringing that in, but in general, it wasn't very wide in Ireland. So, again, I had an opportunity to work with a teaching context. I was offered to do some work with the INTO, the Irish National Teachers Organisation. And so great, happy days. I'm thinking, okay, here's another opportunity to influence. Maybe I'll come at this leadership from a different level. So rather than trying to develop the kids, let's try and develop some of the teachers and their thinking. So you can picture the scene. I may have been 24 or 25. I'm standing in front of this group of teachers, not unlike a big group like we have here today. And the sad news is they absolutely hated me. The evaluation forms were scathing. They hated the beeper that I used. They didn't like what I was suggesting. Everything was wrong. The innovative classroom practices that I was bringing back from the States, they just weren't ready for it. And I think I was just too young as well. I just didn't have the credibility from their point of view. So not one to hang around. I thought, okay, I don't think I'm going to get too far here. I decided to go into the corporate world. So I joined OMT Consulting in Limerick. So I do have some connections here. I don't know if anyone knows OMT Consulting, yeah? They gave me my big break into the corporate world. And in saying that, they let me join. You know, I was doing fantastic work. I was working with leaders. It was always in teams and team development and leadership development, because that's what I was passionate about, and having a big impact. I went from there into Hewlett-Packard. Pretty quickly, and I was developing teams across the site. It was a greenfield site in Leixlip at the time, and I had just a brilliant job, a plummy job, you know. But being young and ambitious, you know, I had to move on. So I got headhunted into AIB. You know, I sometimes say AIB, and I can actually see the room drop a little. But yes, I was headhunted into AIB. It was the year 2000. And, you know, it was absolutely brilliant, I have to tell you, for me. I was brought in as head of learning and development for 2,500 people. It was the capital markets division, and they wanted to set up their own learning and development. I had brilliant budgets. I was able to hire in my own team. It was hunky-dory, you know. I was like, wow, like this was my dream job. And I just couldn't believe it. And indeed, my family couldn't believe it. You know, I was suddenly at a more senior level than my father had been in a whole career in banking. So it was really significant. Year 2000, I was invited to the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development to come and tell the HR world what I was doing, because again, I was innovative in what I was doing. Management development centres, we were doing executive coaching, we were doing team development. And on the 1st of September 2003, my son was born. His name is Connor. And Connor has Down syndrome. He was born with a tetralogy of Fallot, which is a really serious heart condition. And he's had eye surgeries, he's had ear surgeries. You know, the one thing I can say about him is the statistics never went his way. You know, he had sets of grommets. I think there was a 1 in 300 chance that the grommets would cause a problem. He was that one. Every time there was stats, they went against him. To say that I fell apart is not an underestimation. I was utterly devastated. There was no manual for this. I hadn't anticipated, you know, normal kids, typical kids can be hard enough, but this, the hospital appointments, the surgeries, and I was trying to keep this senior level job going, which was like a 16-hour day job. So 2 years in, I struggled on for the next 2 years out of pig iron. You know, I wasn't giving up. But after 2 years, I just said to myself, do you know what? I'm not here in work 100%. I'm not at home 100%. And who am I? Where am I? I was never where I was. I wasn't present in any location. And it was really, really difficult. So what I decided to do was, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to give up this job. So I gave up my third permanent and pensionable job, and I decided I'd go home and be a full-time mum. So that was great. Got things back under control on the home front. We got plans in place. He got to see his speech therapist. You know, all those things that are so essential. And I was really conscious that the first 5 years of a child's life, particularly a child with Down syndrome, are absolutely vital. It's all about early intervention. And me knowing that as an educator, I couldn't just pursue my own agenda. So about a year on from there, you know, things started to settle. We got into some kind of a plan, some kind of routine. And I thought, you know, I've a couple of hours to spare here, I think. So I thought, what am I going to do with myself? So I'm not one to just sit around, as you can imagine. So I said, okay, look, maybe I'll start a little business. That was in 2006. But the one thing I didn't want to do was to be a jack of all trades. You know, I had been hiring consultants into AIB, and the ones that I would not give work to were the ones that were saying, no matter what you said, we can do that. We can do that. I just didn't trust that they were actually experts in anything. So what I decided to do was to stick with what I knew, and I was going down the route of leadership and team and management development. So I've always stayed with the core. So I was there, set up in the office. There was no such thing as a Leo then, actually. It's interesting to hear other people tell their stories here and how helpful it was and all the support they've got and everything that you have here. There was nothing like that. And I had no idea how to run a business or how to set up a business. So I sat there with my phone, a little photocopier, and that was it, like, you know, it was me and that. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what'll I call this business? So the one thing I did was I took a loan out and I worked with a branding consultant and figured out we'd call ourselves TIO Consulting, standing for teams, individuals, and organizations, because I always see the leader at the center, just trying to balance those balls, keep the balls in the air. I see leaders as jugglers, you know, and sometimes you'll drop one of the balls and then you have to pick it back up, you know, and it's always just trying to get the sink in there, and that's the sweet spot for me. So, sat there, finally one day, I'd put the word out and the phone rang. So, you know, when you get your first phone call and you're sitting there, it's actually really exciting. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. You've just set up. And it was one of my old colleagues from AIB. So he was there, Amanda, I have some work for you. And I was like, great, fantastic. And he described the work. But the work that he described and what he was going to pay me for it, I just was like, I don't think that really values my experience. And I wanted to value my experience. So I said, look, I explained where I was at. I said, I'm really sorry, but thank you. I put the phone down. Then I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And you know what? I've never told anybody else this. But for the next 3 weeks, I sweated. I was like, oh my God, the phone's not ringing. Why didn't I take that piece of work, you know? Eventually the phone did ring and I got a piece of work, and my business is all word of mouth. You know, I didn't have a website for 8 years. The first 8 years I was in business. I'm now in business 12 years. Literally, the way I see it is you're doing your performance management every single day of the week in my business. You stand up in front of somebody. If you're good, they'll recommend you. If you're not, you're gone. That's it. So thankfully, people appreciated what I was doing, and the business started to roll. It was rocking and rolling. I was getting loads of referrals, and people were bringing me in. We managed to set up a partnership with a company in New Zealand called Concordia, which was fabulous. They had some culture audit tools. We were bringing them into Ireland. I had some executive coaches on board. Things were going tickety-boo. And then I heard somebody mention here earlier today about 2009. And 2009 for us was just like everybody else. Boom. Absolute crash. You know, the phone stopped ringing. The fantastic photocopier which I had got, which was now half the size of the room, that my sister-in-law had said, my God, she said, you're no longer a cottage industry. Well, that photocopier had to go back. And it was just me again. I was just sitting there thinking, oh my God, here we go again. And then my husband was made redundant from his job in Extravision. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, you know, what are we going to do? You know, what will I do? Will I just go back and take a job, go back in and work for some other corporate, which I could do. You know, there was always opportunities there. But you know, it wasn't the work that I wanted to do. I really wanted to stick with my passion. So I hung out and I knocked on doors. And I remember at one stage going over the Wicklow Mountains in snow and ice because the client I was going to work for wouldn't actually pay for my accommodation. So I'd be driving over at 6 o'clock in the morning to be there for 8 to set up the training room. Like literally taking life and limb, but the only thing I was doing was I was just keeping the doors open. You know, I wasn't making money, I was just keep going. That's the only thing I knew how to do. I'm just going to keep going. It was a bit like back to one woman and a red suitcase. You know, I'm sometimes known I pull a red suitcase along with me with all my training materials. And somehow, and everyone here in the room that has your own business, you will have found this within yourself to just keep going. The chips are down, but you're just not going to give up because you believe in what you have to offer and you believe in yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here. And that was me. And I kept going. And here we are today. You'll see from our website that our business has been really successful. I am now working with a lot of the large organisations in Ireland. They're all blue chip. Top team work. Most of my work is with C-suite level. So it's with CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and then there are a few other programs that I deliver, things that I'm passionate about. So there's people here in the room, I'm looking around, that were part of my leadership program. I ran a program for LEOs, the Business Development Advisors. And that's the kind of work that I love to do because you can actually see leaders develop right in front of your eyes, and they're having an impact on so many other people. The other thing is I now have a team of 4 people in the office, and I have 10 global executive coaches working with me who are delighted to be part of my panel. And sometimes I pinch myself, you know, and I go back to that 9-year-old thinking, did I ever think that I would even be here today standing in front of you? So there's a couple of things that I've learned, and I think I've heard some other people here say this afternoon in terms of your leadership resilience. These are my top tips for leadership resilience. It's about backbone. And somebody else mentioned bones. You know, them bones need calcium. Backbone, you've got to keep the backbone no matter what. So you make your decision, you commit, and you move on. If you're trying to be successful in business, you haven't got time to be procrastinating and making the perfect decision. Just make a decision, and you can always revisit it. Secondly, for me, it's about heart. So the clients that I worked with very early on are clients that are still working with me today. And we've grown together, and they know me warts and all. You know, they know me, literally, they've seen me in the highs, they've seen me in the lows, they've seen me the whole way through, and we have actually developed and grown together, and I've witnessed their careers and their failures, their challenges. It's fabulous work. And the other thing is about integrity. So women in the room will know that we all have a really strong gut. It's called a woman's instinct. And we know as well, we can feel it in our body when we don't listen to our gut. You actually can feel it, and you know you're doing the wrong thing. But what I would strongly encourage you to do is listen to your gut, trust your gut, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in selling your business, in working with your team. If you sense there's something wrong, there is something wrong. You need to ask the question. Finally, I would say stay open, stay curious, and stay agile. Thank you for listening to my story. Thanks. Thank you.
That was lovely.